Quaid Azam, Part 224. In consequence, negotiations between Nehru and Jinnah immediately came to an end. In the absence of any definite evidence, it would be hasty to suggest that Jinnah's call was inspired by the government, but Lithgow was inclined to regard it as a convincing reply to India League's statement. He claimed in his correspondence with the Secretary of State that Jinnah, by calling for Deliverance Day, had given sufficient evidence that the communal problem was a live issue. Meanwhile, so as to better explain the British Cabinet Parliament, the Muslim position, Lithgow proposed a Muslim delegation to Britain. Zetland demurred, considering the idea was somewhat misconceived. He felt instead that the propaganda should not be confined solely to negative insistence that the Muslims could not be a party to self-government in India on the principle of unqualified majority. In order to be successful, the League ought to clarify the terms and conditions on which they would be prepared to accept self-government. Lithgow thereafter began to urge the Muslim League to put forward concrete proposals to counteract the Congress demand for independence and a constituent assembly to frame a constitution for the independent India. Lithgow spoke to Jinnah on several occasions, urging that it would be impossible to educate public opinion in Britain, and more particularly the 600-odd representatives in the House of Commons, by simply a submission of a formal memorandum to the British government. Reporting to Zetland on this subject, Lithgow wrote, "I again put forward the familiar argument for formulating and publishing constructive policy, and in the light of our discussion he said that he was disposed to think that it would be wise for his friends and himself to make public at any rate and the outlines of their position in good time." Still not very strong on the ground, the League was probably not in a position at this stage to commit itself fully on the constitutional issue, but it could also not afford to postpone such commitment indefinitely. Both the Congress and the Muslim League had rejected the British government's scheme, embodied in 1935 Act, to establish an all-India federation. Congress had countered it by an alternative plan of a constitution not to be framed by the Constituent Assembly. The League, while opposing both British and Congress proposals, had no plans of its own. Previously, it had subscribed to the idea of loose federation for India. The results of the 1937 elections had clearly shown that despite separate electorates and reservation of the seats, the League could not hope to play a decisive role in the proposed federation, and that adherence to an all-India federation would leave them gravely disadvantaged. He suggested instead that the British government should revise India's future constitution de novo. The Pakistan Resolution, Lahore, 1940. It is in these circumstances that the fateful fourth decade of the 20th century arrived. The year 1940 opened with two basic issues before the country: whether the Viceroy's offer to expand this council was acceptable to the main political parties, and whether the formation of the consultative group of the Indian leaders for the prosecution of the war would in turn be acceptable to the political parties concerned. At a meeting of the League's Working Committee in February 1940 in Delhi, on the Viceroy's suggestions, a proposal was moved to send a League delegation to London to plead its case before the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State.